Good morning to all of you. Welcome into First Take on a Wednesday. It's hump day, gentlemen, halfway through the week.
What's going on? What's up, man?
How are you?
We're fired up, though.
How's everything?
It's midweek, right? A lot to get into. So coming up on the show, we have A-Rod. He's not happy. He isn't getting playing time in the majors. Should the Yanks play A-Rod more? Don't miss that debate. Plus, we start with the NFL, though. Ray Rice joined Mike and Mike this morning and spoke about his domestic violence incident and how he feels about other players like Greg Hardy getting a second chance while he hasn't gotten his. Take a listen. All right, Ray Rice opening up on his current situation on Mike and Mike. Stephen A., does he deserve a second chance?
I think he does. I think he deserves a second chance. I think that he's been deserved a second chance as it pertains to the incident in question. And believe it or not, regardless of whether he wants to say it or not, I don't believe it's because of him. I believe it's because of the transgressions made by others who still find a way to remain in the NFL. If you have those individuals in the NFL, the Greg Hardys of the world and others, who show a significant less level of contrition compared to what Ray Rice has done, when you compare what Ray Rice has employed and what he has exercised in terms of bringing attention to the issue of domestic violence, I appreciate Greeny Mike Greenberg on Mike and Mike this morning articulating for the masses that regardless of what we've all been exposed to as men, we never truly knew how deep and how significant this issue was in the American fabric until Ray Rice came into being. I have two relatives that were the victims of domestic violence. I witnessed it growing up, got myself in some trouble because of the things that I did to the individuals that put their hands on my family. But when you see it, you really think that it's an isolated incident. And then when Ray Rice comes out and then you see the numbers that were out there and how 85% of the victims of domestic violence are women and how prevalent it is in our society, obviously you have an obligation to assist Ray Rice in bringing attention to that matter. And the fact that he's going about the business of doing things the way that he does things warrants a second chance. But I also think that he has to be realistic. They're usually thinking you're pretty close to finished anyway as a running back in the NFL by the age of 30. Ray Rice was talented and good, and he was rough and rugged, and he was tough. But he was never confused as being Adrian Peterson or anybody like that. And even though he averaged better than 4 yards a carry every season in his career until the last one, the last time we saw him prior to this domestic violence incident, he was averaging 3.1 yards a carry. Now, he attributed that to an injury when he was talking to Mike and Mike this morning. That's fair, but this has been going, that's been said about him for quite a long time. And it's the first time I've ever heard that brought up. So it seems a bit convenient that he's coming up with that excuse for his 3.1 yards per carry during that particular 2013 season. So in that regard, I think that has a lot to do with him not getting a second chance. I also think, obviously, you have a lot of teams that are very reticent because even though we're a society that prides ourselves on giving second chances, you have a plethora of individuals out there who don't want you to ever get a second chance. They don't want Ray Rice to get a second chance. They didn't want Michael Vick to get a second chance after Michael Vick served 18 months in a federal penitentiary, Leavenworth, for the whole dogfighting scandal. You have some folks in our society, they're just not that willing to forgive. And so you look at it from that perspective. And then here's another thing that's working against Ray Rice. The Baltimore Ravens, Steve Bichetti, I have to say this because this is very important. Outside of the domestic violence he inflicted upon his then fiancee, now wife, the other thing that Ray Rice did that I thought was very wrong on his part was he dimed out the owner. The owner had privately texted him or emailed him, I forget which it was, and he was basically saying, you're a Raven for life, Max. You're a Raven for life. We'll take care of you, et cetera, et cetera. And Ray was so hell-bent on telling the world how honest he was, that he basically threw the owner to the wolves. Because now the owner had to backtrack because the owner didn't want to come across as somebody who was condoning your violence. He just wanted to let you know that he had your back and he was going to support you and you would always have a job here. I firmly believe this. If Ray Rice had never done that, I think the city of Baltimore, remember, we saw women outside the stadium in the aftermath of the Ray Rice incident, supporting him being allowed back into the NFL. I truly believe in my heart that the Baltimore Ravens would have brought Ray Rice back and given him another chance by now if he hadn't been so hell-bent on coming across to some degree at that point as self-righteous in terms of explaining how honest he was to everybody. Roger Goodell, Steve Bichetti, Ozzie Newsome, and everybody else. Had he not done that, I think Ray Rice would have been back with the Baltimore Ravens by now. So he did this to himself because of the violence. He did this to himself because he dimed out the owner, Steve Bichetti. But based on everything that he has done in terms of the aftermath of what's transpired, the contrition that he has shown, if anyone deserves a second chance after committing such an egregious act, it would be him, especially in today's NFL when we appear to have a bevy of individuals, not a lot, but a few guys, you know, getting in trouble for this kind of egregious act.
America's the land of opportunity and second and third chances, and I think that's human nature. We like to see someone come up off the deck and dust themselves off, even from a self-inflicted wound, although this is obviously an assault on someone else. But in terms of his career, he did this to himself. Particularly when that person shows real public remorse. You believe that their public display of contrition is genuine and that they've internalized the lessons that their behavior wrought. For example, Mike Vick, you bring up, Stephen A. Michael Vick was involved in a real moral crime, but his behavior since then seemed to be of someone who had internalized the lessons that he learned, who simply wasn't parroting what he thought everyone wanted to hear, but it became part of himself. He made himself a better person. And then the question becomes, after time, there's still people who can't get over what Michael Vick did and don't want to forgive him and don't believe he ever deserved a second chance. But there are plenty of others, and eventually he did get his second chance, who say, look, this is someone who made a terrible mistake, did the crime, did the time, paid his debt to society, has become a better man, now deserves this opportunity. Here's the problem with Ray Rice as it relates to that. Number one, you brought it up, 3.1 yards a carry. If it was 5.1 yards a carry, oh, he'd have another job in the NFL. A 29-year-old running back, even though he's had 2 years of rest now, so maybe he wouldn't take the wear and tear of a normal 29-year-old running back, even if he blames it on an injury in his last season, so it's 3 years since he's really himself, and now he's staring at 30, 3.1 yards a carry, you might not get another job just based on production, particularly if you come with all this baggage. But here's the biggest issue. You can't unring the bell if you're Ray Rice because of the video evidence. The way human beings are wired, the way our brains operate, when you see something in front of your face, an egregious crime, that will affect you emotionally differently than if you hear of some statistic from far away, some abstract number. Even if the number is a horrific number, you know, this number of thousands of women are victims of domestic abuse, that will not resonate with the human psyche and emotionally the way it will if you see a video of, and that video in particular is indelible. You can't get the toothpaste back in the tube. You can't unring that bell. So what Ray Rice is up against now is not only showing that the contrition is legitimate and that he's internalized those lessons, not only that, but also that he can produce, and even then, he's up against the reality that we all saw what we saw and we can never unsee it. And I think when you all add all that up, Stephen A., whatever side of the kind of ethical debate you land on, he deserves it or he doesn't deserve it, I don't think he's going to get it.
I don't think he's going to get it either, but the question is whether or not he deserves it. And I think you deserve it because you always want to show people that you've got a shot at a second chance. The problem is his lack of production. The problem is that he's alienated the one franchise that would be incentivized to bring him on board, because he was pretty much a pillar of the Baltimore community. He was an individual that was beloved by the locals there. He was one of their own. And usually when you transgress to a significant degree, you have an opportunity to go home. That's why home is so important to so many people, because it's the one sanctuary the one haven that you can go to where you're somewhat rescued, never completely because of the video. We understand that. But if there's anybody, despite the video, that could take him on board and a community would stand up and say, we forgive you. We'll never forget, but we forgive you, and genuinely mean it, it's most of the people in the Baltimore community, which is why it was absolutely foolish for him to feel this need to be so honest that he would come across as throwing ownership for the Baltimore Ravens under the bus. That's the last thing he should have done. And to me, that's the nail in the coffin. So I agree with you. I don't think he will get another chance. But should he, the only way he shouldn't get another chance is if the NFL and the people who support the NFL, meaning the patrons, went through each franchise and said, anybody that's associated with domestic violence, you're out of here. Anybody that's associated with acts of violence, you're out of here. If you get rid of everybody, then that's different. But because you've got some people still in the league, that's why I think with the level of contrition he has shown, that he could do a lot of good, because you bring a lot of, he's brought, like Mike and Mike said, he's brought more attention to the domestic violence issue than anybody in recent memory. It's a damn shame he had to do it that way. It's shameful that he did it that way. But nevertheless, there is something that can come out of this, because he's making a concerted effort to remind the world how wrong he was, how much he wants a second chance, and like Michael Vick with the dogfighting scandal, is willing to march lockstep in support of victims of domestic violence to bring attention to the cause, even if he has to use himself as a battering ram. No pun intended, sorry but use that analogy. But if you got to use yourself as that guy that's getting hit time after time after time again because of what you shamefully did.
Molly, as the only woman on the show and as a big football fan, where do you come down on Ray Rice right now?
I don't think Ray Rice is going to get a second chance, and I think that's because of football. So what do we say it stands for? Not for long, and especially with the running back position and him being 29 years old and not coming off a strong season. And as you mentioned, maybe even if the Ravens were going to take a chance, he closed that door. And they've also said Justin Forsett looks phenomenal. As far as Ray Rice from the moral issue, I do believe he deserves a second chance. And like you mentioned, Michael Vick, and in contrast to Greg Hardy, he's done all the right things, at least publicly he appears, and showing his contrition and his remorse for the egregious acts and going through the protocol that the NFL has set up and the counseling and working on his family. And it doesn't make it okay, but everybody's from different backgrounds and raised different ways, and I'm happy that he got the proper help and he's addressed it and moving forward. But as far as the football piece, I do not think that he will get a second chance based on that. And I think if teams are on the fence, unfortunately, they're going to say now, fortunately or fortunately, they're going to say, we don't want the hoopla that comes along with it. So if any shot, yes, maybe as a backup down the road, but I really don't think so. But I think it's purely based on football. And if they weren't sure, it's not worth all the attention that it's going to bring.
Not worth it.
So we will leave that one there. When we come back, we are going to switch gears to Cam Newton. He's the reigning NFL MVP, but does he belong in the elite category of quarterbacks? Some don't think so. We'll explain next.